This is the Daily Mail, Brexiteer, absolutely, totally persistent racists, backers of Boris Johnson's racist, denying, delaying, law-breaking, careerist policies and regime. This was the morning headline, which was prevaricating, trying to accommodate Boris Johnson's dilemma caused by the brazen latest assault on the ordinary people and pupils and ordinary schools that are not attended by people who are wealthy and belong to the Boris Johnson side of society. Ordinary people who send their school to ordinary schools, those schools were robbed, and the Daily Mail could not bring itself to calling for the scrapping of the corrupt robbery and looting. This is now different. In the hours since the Daily Mail hit the newsagents, the Boris Johnson regime has been forced to stage a U-turn and scrap the robbery and looting. But that has been as a result, directly as a result of concerted action by the robbed and the deprived and the denied. Most students staged demonstrations for days across the country, and also they initiated the preliminary stages of the judicial review High Court process. As I said in the previous edition, judicial review was not the correct way to go, because the judicial review is controlled by a corrupt court system, which is part of an extension of the corrupt so-called system of the state that Boris Johnson actually currently fronts. So the court system, despite the accidental, typically tokenistic exceptions when it fines for the victims, is often overwhelmingly for the status quo and against the victims of injustice. And we shall be covering the injustice and the corruption, the criminality, and the racist constitution of the court system in England and Wales in another separate edition that will be devoted to this. But today's update is about the about turn staged by Boris Johnson and his bogus cabinet member for education, or at the expense of education, against schools, Gavin Williamson. Gavin Williamson, as has been pointed out by ourselves and some others on the so-called media, looks like Michael Crawford, the actor who played Some Mothers Do Heaven in the BBC series. And he has been portrayed as a completely incompetent, inefficient, unfit for job incumbent. And his name and his image have been portrayed as part of the dysfunctioning regime that Boris Johnson is operating, and is being caught as failing the country and the people and the peoples at every stage. So this was the Daily Mail forced to run this two-page piece about the protests by the victims and the robbed in the Daily Mail. So tomorrow it will be interesting. That is Tuesday's edition of the Daily Mail. We shall be covering that and see how it actually is covered. The Daily Mail content, the copy, the texts are not representative of the outrage felt by the robbed and the victims and the ordinary observers of the corruption that is the school system and the grading system and the university system that we have touched on earlier, and we shall be continuing to elaborate on with case examples. Those who missed the previous editions are reminded of the case studies, including at least 3 PhD degrees or PhD titles or PhD recognitions or PhD stumps given to 3 liars who abused the hospitality of the community in Tower Hamlets and the generosity of the community in Tower Hamlets and produced works of fiction, criminal fabrication and lying, and anti-Bangladeshi, anti-Siloti, and anti-Muhammad Haque fabrications and contents. So we shall be examining those crooks, and the crooks in the universities, the so-called Russell group of universities, will be examined in relation to those criminals perpetrating the lies under the cover of so-called university doctoral research. Those liars doctored the truth and lied, and they shall be held to account and exposed. Now, the algorithm that has been used by the social media, Facebook, Google, and others, algorithm is a mathematical fiction that is exposed at last in a big way as being a device for lying. It's like Boris Johnson being given credit for being able to speak or read Latin. As I have said before, Latin is a language. It is not in itself a superiority, a morality, or ethics above ordinary other languages. So anyone can lie in Latin if they can lie in English, which is the case in Boris Johnson, but nobody makes that connection. I'm making the connection. And I'm saying that it is grotesquely stupid of people to say that Boris Johnson can read and understand and probably speak Latin. It's not a qualification. When it comes to morality, when it comes to ethics, accountability, transparency, and basic truth telling. As algorithm is a word, it is from the arena of mathematics, but it has been glorified by the kind of overly corrupt abusers of the social platforms. And these people have glorified algorithm to the point where it is paraded, or it has been paraded until this week, as being beyond the ordinary person's comprehension, understanding, and ability. It is not, it's just a mathematical device. It's a statistical device, has been used to tell lies, perfect lies. In fact, the domain with lying. So algorithm by itself is not a guarantee of getting the basic facts, let alone getting the truthful facts. And it has been exposed, and the Daily Mail on page 5 of Monday, the 17th of August 2020 admits that, because the organization called OFQUAL, that is the office for qualifications that has been at the center of the confections and lying and robbery of the state schools, ordinary schools, pupils. Its boss, Roger Taylor, apparently has admitted that algorithms can cause real harm. So that's Roger Taylor. And the main headline, of course, is shambles of the sentence, exam shambles. Now, shambles is a completely diversionary word that takes away the focus for accountability and responsibility from the perpetrators. And calling it a shambles, the Daily Mail and others, the majority of Fleet Street that backs Boris Johnson and ignores and hides and conceals his lying and deception and incompetence, he has been using shambles, not corruption, not bias, not anti the ordinary person, the anti the poor people attitude. So that is what needs to be replacing the word shambles or the fiasco. And these are the two words among about 3 or 4 words that are used by those who are called the apologists for the wrongdoers and who want to hide the actual extent and the fact, if they can, of the wrongdoers. And Boris Johnson is a persistent wrongdoer in office and in the quest for office that he ran about 20 years before he got there. Now, here is a piece in the Daily Mail about Keir Starmer. And he is saying that the schools must open in September. Now, Keir Starmer is being portrayed here as his trade union paymaster, the Labour Party, which gets the majority of its bulk funding donations from the trade unions. They are saying that he is defying the trade union or union paymasters. They don't use the phrase trade union. They call it union. So there is a sinister suggestion in the word union rather than trade union. Trade union is more accurate and it's less sinister. But the right-wing anti-trade union interests that control and operate the likes of the Daily Mail and the Daily Mail group prefer the word union, which comes across as a sinister menace. So what they are saying, that portraying Keir Starmer as being besieged by menacing trade unions who are saying that schools should not be opened because of safety ground. And the herd immunity, HERD, herd immunity agenda that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings and others have followed from the beginning of this pandemic as it affected the UK from February through to March, April was the herd immunity, which is to let as many people get infected as possible. And the deadly reasoning, justification, absolutely false, untrue, illogical, was that the more people get infected, the more people will get immunized by that infection. Quite how that works when it comes to acknowledging that infection necessarily, if allowed in that way as they did, entailed murders of people, which is what the WSWS.org website has accused Boris Johnson of doing, mass murders. And this is what the trade unions are worried about. And this is what this agenda of herd immunity is what Keir Starmer is following, which is why Keir Starmer, being often mentioned as a, quote, barrister with forensic skills, is absolutely the wrong person for the post of the leader of the opposition that this country needs. He is not anywhere. He is not anywhere in this campaign that these pupils and their parents and their schools have successfully been carrying out this past few days. Keir Starmer has not been supporting the pupils and the schools, ordinary schools, and their parents. He has probably tweeted and let on some token sympathy. But Keir Starmer is not in solidarity, not dedicated in solidarity with the victims of the robbery. So what we are saying is that there is a bias. It's not a slogan by Jeremy Corbyn or the extreme left or whatever. There is no extreme left in this country. Anyway, the point is that for centuries, the education bureaucracy, the education business operated through the various quote institutions have been operated and controlled for the benefit of the very small number of people who are wealthy in comparison with the very large number of people who are not wealthy. And that corrupt business domestically in the UK has been done by expropriating and looting and robbing hundreds of millions of people and hundreds of trillions worth of resource from Africa and Asia, from the so-called colonies. So whatever accumulation of wealth currently still exists in this country, in the UK, is directly the result, the embodiment, the collection of looted wealth, looted from people in the country itself and looted from people outside. So that's the context in which the so-called migrants rushed to take over England, coming from Calais, must be seen again. Now, there's bias against the ordinary people, people in relatively low income groups, individuals, families have been, it is actually exposed in the series of so-called reforms that Robert Jenrick has launched in the last month. Jenrick has launched that in the immediate aftermath of his being caught in a scandal involving the porn billionaire Richard Desmond and the property in Tower Hamlets in the Isle of Dogs, where the porn billionaire is embroiled in a planning dispute over his mega housing, luxury housing complex that will be built to make more millions and to be let or sold to wealthy people, mostly coming from abroad, wealthy oligarchs and others similar, from backgrounds where there is no oligarchy, like in China and other in the Middle East. The terms for oligarchs are different terms, but essentially these are not intended to be properties that would be let to or be used by people in low income, individuals or families, either from Tower Hamlets or anywhere else in the country. So he launched, Robert Jenrick, or he fronted the launching of the completely, absolutely illogical, unscientific, undemocratic, anti-democratic, anti-social, anti-economics, anti-society measure to do away with any, quote, even residual democratic accountability for the applicants for degenerating buildings in areas like Tower Hamlets or in other parts of the country. So he's calling it, as the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Express, and others cheering him in the attack on democracy, accountability, and society. They've been calling it red tape. He's getting rid of red tape. So he's dismissing, he's condemning, he's distorting democracy. Whatever residual form of democracy is evident in the planning control or planning say that the local councils have up till now. And so therefore, generics attacks on the construction audit or local accountability on construction and buildings is similar, absolutely identical, and similar in bias and hostility and disrespect for or disregard for the local people, as is evident in the robbing of the hundreds of thousands of children that has been exposed now and has been now scrapped. That particular incident of the robbery has been scrapped under the pressure of the street campaign and the pressure of the other expressions of outrage from across society, including from constituency MPs from the Conservative Party, because some of the constituencies are vulnerable to be lost to the Conservatives based on the evidence of the robbery of the ordinary people in those constituencies. So the Times on the same day today, Monday, the Times ran the piece that says that Boris Johnson was told to end, again they're using the keyword shambles. He has been told by Tories, that is Tory members of parliament, to end the shambles, and they're not calling it the crime or robbery, let alone anti-ordinary people bias and crime. They're saying shambles. Shambles means that it happened by accident or it happened by lack of kind of attention. Maybe they were drinking too much or they were on holiday or something. Similar kind of disengaged with the evidence, disengaged with the action kind of attitude. And there is this picture of the woman. Now, whether she is part of the kind of working class or not is not clear, but she is carrying a banner or a placard that says justice for the state school sector. Yeah? And she may be a teacher, she may be a parent, and justice for the state school sector is in line with the campaign for the idea of a national health service available at the point of need. Again, in a separate edition, we shall be examining the inadequacies and the corruption and the bias and the racism built in the National Health Service. But essentially, the idea of the National Health Service, if it is kept away from corruption and it is delivered, genuinely delivered without racist denial and bias and hostility, then the idea is absolutely superb. But it has never been, the National Health Service has never been, and I'm saying this on the record, it has never been available on those bases. The slogan has been there, but it has never been available on those bases. And the statistics, the data, the accumulated data over the decades vindicate, justify what I'm saying. The disproportionate number of casualties in, quote, supposedly in care or receiving NHS treatment in NHS hospitals and institutions, the disproportionate number of casualties are from the Asian community, from the African community. And it is not something that has just happened during the pandemic when the care homes were overly staffed with people with prejudice, and the residents were disproportionately Asian people in the case of Tower Hamlets, one case of Tower Hamlets. And so therefore, the use of the word shambles is not accidental. It is intentional diversion and deflecting attention from the truth of the bias and the hostility against the state sector, against the ordinary people. And there is this theme running through all the coverage of the protests against the robbery. And they say, this is in other words, as I say, the Times on inside pages 4 and 5, it is on the front page it calls the shambles, and on the inside pages in the headline it calls it fiasco. The same editorial intention to shield Boris Johnson and Gavin Williamson and the Tories from actual accountability for the crime they committed, the latest crime they committed against society, against the poor, against the idea of society. And what I have said earlier about the NHS bias and racism in the delivery of the NHS is acknowledged in a backhanded way in the Times on page 6. Racial gap in taser use on children. This is something, this is very, very new, the use of tasers. But even the new device is contaminated by racism, by the people who have the power, individuals who use the tasers. This report comes only within the 10 days or 8 days of Dawn Butler, the MP for Brent in London, being in the news after she was stopped and not searched but stopped by a Met Police person. And this was the case where Dawn Butler says that black people are disproportionately more frequently stopped than white people. And she said that the available statistics available to her at the time showed that 85% of the people who are stopped are not acted on because there is no evidence, and only 15% are acted on for some evidence. And she was saying how illogical is that to base a policy of allowing the police to stop black people based on 15% of very fragile kind of statistics, 15% of the tenuous link with some kind of evidence. So here in the story by Nabeem Badshah, now this is absolutely hysterical. I mean, they have assigned an Asian sounding named person, given them the byline for this story. And the story is not an original one from the Times, quote, news staff. It's a story that they're retailing from the Guardian. But here is the item. children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Black and minority means African and Asian. So that's a racist use of language. They don't want to call African and Asian. That is a racist restraint, racist reluctance to acknowledge the facts, the identities of the continents or nationalities or ethnic groups or whatever from African and Asian backgrounds. So children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds, and minority reduces automatically the ratio. The population in the world is overwhelmingly Asian and African, or more Asian people live on this planet than more white people, European people. But the use of the minority in the middle of that phrase automatically, mentally, subliminally reduces the image of the strength of the people's numbers on the planet. So this is a linguistic craft confected and perpetrated by racists who hide their true hostility and refusal to recognize the parity of the people from African and Asian backgrounds. And this is a point that Thomas Babington Macaulay should take note of if he's around in a ghostly form. So they said, children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. There is no such thing as minority ethnic. So we can continue to diagnose this corruption of language for an hour. But for the time being, we shall move on. Children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds are nearly 3 times more likely to have a taser used on them by police compared with white youngsters, figures show. Stun gun use against those aged between 11 and 17 among all ethnicities is rising, with 61% more children facing them last year, that is 2019, than in 2018, according to Freedom of Information requests by The Guardian. Now back to the first paragraph again, the other linguistic corruption. Children from black and minority ethnic backgrounds are nearly 3 times more likely to have a taser used on them. Likely to have a taser used on them is absolute lie. They don't have a propensity, which this sentence suggests, have. They don't want to have taser used against them at all. But this suggests that they have a tendency, they have a propensity, an eagerness, a desire to have tasers applied against them. So the reason why this edition and this series is called Diagnosing Fleet Street from London, UK, is for this reason. Diagnosing the words, the linguistic craft, and the deception, not only in the headlines, but in the thinking behind the headlines, behind the contents, behind the copy. So it's a unique program, Diagnosing Fleet Street, the British newspapers, coming from the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, which is based on defending the community in the East End of London. And that defense actually depends on our understanding of the correct attitude or correct understanding of the attitude of the racist media, mainstream racist politicians, mainstream racistly operated and abused institutions and agencies of the state by racist individuals employed by them, employed in them, and allowed by those institutions to abuse their positions. So, institutional racism is one aspect of the whole, and the real whole is actually the person applying their power or misapplying their power, abusing their power against the target of the racist biased, hostile, in denial kind of engagement and treatment. That is why it is diagnosing the media. And this diagnosis is done by me, and I don't think Mr. Chomsky has done anything similar. If he has, I'll be interested to see Mr. Chomsky's corresponding evidence-based diagnosis of the American, if you like, media from the Little Harbor. And the fans of Mr. Chomsky that are in places in the university faculties across the Asian continent, let's say, should actually take note. And whenever this is being viewed, this is recorded on the 17th of August, and it may be viewed any date later. Whenever they view this, they should take serious account of what I'm saying. And there is a piece here on page 12 of the Times which says, "Poorest damaging children's lives by spurning marriage." Now it's a complicated headline, and it's a complicated social and sociological, economical and societal and ethical and moral issue, or issues kind of complexly, and the complexities are huge in this headline. But it does have a lot of contents that are of relevance. And this is about the dysfunctioning single parent families or unmarried couples. But the data shows that there is a very large number of the population that has got unmarried couples living together, or people who are parents. Many of them are single parents, and a significant number of them are single mothers raising children. So this is something that covers a large number of people, but significantly it covers a significant proportion of the people from the African Caribbean background. And it has been the subject of a lot of discussion references, but it has been allowed to be left mainly unaddressed. And we shall be coming to that at another time. Here is Nigel Farage on page 14, still talking against the migrants coming through the channel. Now, on the United Nations television, UNTV, broadcasts from New York, I think, during the day, Monday, the 17th of August 2020. They don't really make serious legal points against the racists in Britain or other countries that are resisting the attempts by the would-be migrants or refugees seeking asylum or refugees in these countries. And the same thing is true of the United Nations press, UNHCR news releases that I have checked today. They are not anywhere near as rigorous as I have been in the last 10 days. And they're not talking about any of the obligations, expressly obligations, contained in the United Nations treaties or the United Nations agencies treaties or the other treaties that have been signed to protect the rights of the people fleeing persecution and hunger and instability. So they are making pleas, P-L-E-A-S, pleas, like appealing to the likes of the UK regime fronted by Boris Johnson, who has been the main inciter against the people seeking refuge in Britain from France and Calais. They're appealing, they're making pleas for them to allow other ways of reaching the destinations through legal and lawful means. And the United Nations agency's press release or news release that I've checked, the releases are dated 13th, 14th, and 15th of August and onwards. They're saying that the process of applying and getting an outcome or a decision is too cumbersome and too time consuming. I'm paraphrasing, of course, I'm not reading the copy, but I'm actually paraphrasing the substance. So, what I'm saying is that the United Nations itself is openly failing to point out the breaches of United Nations charters, declarations, and treaties based on the United Nations remits. And that is what I am doing, and that is what we are doing, and that is what the campaign that we have launched of seeking court-based, law-based remedies against this is based on. This is the basis of seeking compliance by the UK and other states where refugees are being refused. Refugees applications and attempts by these refugees are being denied and refused and obstructed, and the refugees are being maligned and demonized and misportrayed and all the rest of it. These are completely out of order. And the person who is supposedly the UNHCR's UK kind of face has been boasting about having spoken to Kent online this past week or today, maybe in the last 2 days, because we can't access Kent online because it is blocked by a request to comply with the intrusive data collection mechanism, which we refuse to comply with because we don't know the abuses they would be committing of the data they may have access. So we have not read the actual detailed text of the interview that this person gave to Kent online. Suffice to say that she is not, it's a female person, she is not actually departing from the policy that I have outlined in relation to what the United Nations main agency, UNHCR, and the UN itself has been saying. They are not pointing out the breaches of the obligations under the treaty obligations that the United Kingdom is signed up to. And in that context, just to continue the campaign against the refugees that Priti Patel has been doing, there has been the obvious presence of Nasty Nigel. Nasty Nigel Farage is featured on page 14 of the Times today, Monday, the 17th of August, 2020, as taunting Priti Patel after he found a number of migrants staying at a hotel located in the constituency of Priti Patel. Now, how he got hold of that information, how he arrived there, is a detail that we shall not be detained by here. Suffice to say that the racist operation is quite extensive, and the fact that a number of asylum seekers or migrants were being accommodated in a hotel is being shown by Faraj as a violation of the code of, if you like, racist apartheid, that the migrants should not be allowed, even temporarily, to be staying in a hotel. That is the real bottom line. So he is saying that the Home Office has, this is the copy that is in the Times, written by their deputy political editor, Stephen Swinford. The Home Office has announced a formal review. Can you believe this? They have announced a formal review already. The Home Office has announced a formal review after migrants seeking asylum were mistakenly placed in a hotel in a rural part of Priti Patel's Widam constituency. How dare the asylum seekers be even prepared to stay in a hotel? How dare they? It is so far above their status. So this is the thing, and the Home Office has already ordered a review. How this happened? So you can see the actual extent of brazen racist and class-based hostility and bias and discrimination. These are all against the law. These are all against the UK law, and these are all against the international charters and declarations and conventions that the UK remains signed up to, as they do these racist taunting and exchanges of competition based on who is more racist, who is more hostile, who is more provocative, who is more able to incite hatred against the migrants under any pretext, any excuse, even to the extent that they dare be seen staying at a hotel. It had to be temporary, but even temporary, no matter how temporary, is not acceptable to the racists, to the apartheidists. And for Priti Patel, being the interior minister, and to order a review of this shows how totally committed she is against the migrants and with the racists, the anti-Asian, the anti-African racists, personified by nasty Nigel Farage. So all over the place, it comes to migrants, it comes to the exams, and it comes to housing. The Tories are running a series of assaults on the rights of the ordinary people, the poor people, and this week is going to be the last week before the so-called ban imposed by Robert Jenrick on evictions that ends. And it is predicted, widely predicted, that the number of people who will be made additionally homeless against the background of so many people already being homeless and in overcrowded conditions. This will be a number that will reach 250,000. That is according to the shelter, which, as I said before, is a pliant part of the state propaganda and justification of the state's agenda. Even shelter is having to say that the number of people who will be made homeless would exceed 250,000. And the big issue, which was founded by the self-seeker John Bird, who is now a member of the House of Peers, based on his claim to having founded the so-called homeless magazine called Big Issue. It's so-called homeless because it is supposedly sold by homeless people as vendors in street corners. That is how he sold the plug and he peddled it. And since establishing it about 20 years ago, John Bard has pursued a career destined to take him to the House of Peers, which he has now achieved. And they are also against, of course, the ending of the ban on eviction that Robert Jenrick was forced to impose. He didn't do it voluntarily. he didn't do it happily because the private landlords who were prevented from seeking evictions were delayed in their grubby, profiteering pursuit of evictions against the people who either cannot pay the rent or have the ability to pay less than the amount these landlords crave. So there is this thing called Section 21 no fault eviction procedure available. That means that the tenant doesn't have to have done anything wrong. It's the whim and caprice. This is the law of whim and caprice that has been legalized by successive governments in this country against basic human right to housing. And there is no sign, as I speak, at 18:15, 18:16 hours GMT on Monday, 17th of August 2020, that there would be anything like the comparable protest or outrage in support of the victims of evictions that has been seen by the outraged students correctly that have been robbed of their grading by the Gavin Williamson fronted kind of cabal at the Department Against Education in the Boris Johnson fronted wealthy government for the wealthy, for the rich. And as there is no likelihood, as there is no evidence that there is going to be anything similar to the outrage against the lifting of the ban on evictions, it is most certainly the case that large scale evictions will take place and a whole number of people will be exposed to not only homelessness but also to the virus, which remains on the increase, and it is increasing everywhere. Even in New Zealand, which as a white country, the British media and the mainstream always fondly enlist in the list of acceptable, mentionable countries in the world on anything. New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and South Africa to an extent up to the apartheid period. And so even New Zealand has had to delay their election by some time because of the resurgence of the virus. It's important to mention New Zealand because in the British media, mainstream media, New Zealand was portrayed as a successful example of dealing with the virus. So if New Zealand has had to delay its election because of the virus returning, then Boris Johnson's insistence, in which Keir Starmer is complicit, that schools should be opened again, is completely irresponsible or is in contemptuous defiance of the rights of the people, the children, to be safe. And that means that they are not going to allow the victims of the assault by eviction applications to get any protection. They are going to usher in a new regime of evictions from the 24th of August 2020, which is a week away from today. The only person that has actually made any significant intervention in terms of a statement is the former Jeremy Corbyn leadership member, John McDonnell, who has said that the evictions should be halted, banned for another year. He has made that comment mainly in The Guardian, and it has been retailed by Lever List, I think. but the main media has not picked up John McDonnell's call. But that call is likely to be the only main call in opposition to the lifting of the eviction ban. The leadership of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, is not going to support the tenants, the victims of homelessness, the victims of denial of housing rights, and the victims of denial of remedy through the courts, because most of the courts will be county court procedures. And the county courts in this country are absolutely corrupt. County courts are man and woman, as the glorified title goes, district judges. Men and women district judges are totally corrupt and totally on the side of the rich and the wealthy, which is why there are millions of people in denial of housing rights across this country. Under one pretext or another, for decades, people have been made homeless intentionally. People have been intentionally made homeless by local councils. And the county courts, which is the main forum where the rubber stamp is given to the agenda for making people homeless, the county courts have been playing a criminally complicit part as a whole right across the country for decades. And there is no sign, there is no evidence that even so-called, compared to Keir Starmer, even John McDonnell realizes the extent of the criminality inherent in the day-to-day behavior and policy and attitude of county court judges. And the administration of the county courts are equally corrupt and morally bankrupt and devoid of any sense of justice that can be found in the treaties and charters, as I have been saying, that the UK remains a signatory to. And this is even contrary to the so-called token, but so-called anti-discriminatory legislation that the UK has passed over the years under its obligations, membership of international treaties and forums, including membership of the EU for 40 years. So even under the UK legislation or UK forms or versions of legislation against discrimination, these courts are behaving criminally as agencies of criminal gangs. And the problem with that is that if the courts turn out to be behaving as the main gangsters, then there is no recourse, there is no call for justice to be sought anywhere. So it's a prison of injustice in which hundreds of thousands of people in Britain, so-called indigenous white people, are trapped and their lives are destroyed or challenged or denied. So this item about the people in living outside of marriage and causing harm to the children has to be seen in the context of what remedies are available and what remedies are not. Most remedies are not available to people in poverty. So we shall be returning to all these stories for updates and commentaries in the next edition. This is now 24 minutes past 7 in the evening. That is 6 in the evening GMT. So it's 18:24 GMT and 19:24 UK time on Monday, the 17th of August 2020. So it's 18:24 GMT and 19:24 UK time on Monday, the 17th of August 2018. Until the next edition.